We are joined today to have a discussion on Jahangir by author, historian Parvati Sharma, who wrote Jahangir in the same year that Mughal historiography, popular Mughal historiography, had a renaissance. And this was one of the landmark books to come out that particular year. A lot has been written about the Mughal times. A lot of new literature keeps on emerging about the Mughal dynasty as we know it. But this book is an incredibly interesting book because it was not written by somebody who was just writing dried historical records. It was written by somebody who has a literary flair. And this, you can actually feel the literary work shine through in this biography of Jahangir, because Jahangir is not just sort of an archive material, but somebody who you can listen to, talk to. In fact, at some places, you can even imagine him doing things. So thank you very much on a weekday for taking the time out to join us for this conversation. We welcome you to SenseMaker.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to have been invited. Thank you, Amok. It's a great pleasure to be discussing Jahangir. In fact, in his birthday week, so it's a nice time to be talking about him.
Yeah. hence the scheduling thing. So
yes.
So a lot of people would be wondering, why did you choose to write about Jahangir when you get into the Mughal history? You really have a shining cast of characters to choose from. Jahangir, sandwiched between a great father and celebrated son, is one of those, for lack of a better word, forgotten Mughals. So, first and foremost, why Jahangir?
Yeah, that's a great question to which I don't have a particularly revealing answer, because it was entirely chance. I've had no intention whatsoever of working on Jahangir. I had written a children's book on Babur, and there was no sense in my head that I would be writing about history of anybody, Mughals or anyone at all, for adults. I was writing a novel which featured as one of its protagonists a professor of history, but that was that was as close as it got to history writing. And the novel, it was I was working on it. It was nearing completion, and then my publisher Chiki Sarkar called me and she said, there's something about this that isn't quite working. And I went to meet her. We had this nice discussion, and I agreed with what she was saying. She had a point. Some of the characters weren't working, blah, blah, blah. And she said novels need to marinate. You let it sit at the back of your head for a while, and why don't you do something else just as a kind of distraction? And I remember this moment. I was leaving the room. I was at the door, and I think she had read the children's book on Babur, and she said to me, she said, "Why not Jahangir?" And I've asked her since. I said, "Why did you say Jahangir?" And I'm not sure she herself doesn't quite remember why she said Jahangir. But thank goodness that she did. I'm always eternally grateful to her, because I came home and I was a little sort of disappointed with the novel not working and thinking that I have to go back to it and all that. But anyway, thanks to the internet, I said, let me look up the Jahangir Nama. And I started reading it. I mean, it takes 2 minutes to download. And I started reading it, and I was immediately taken by him. I think, it was really like sort of a God or chance driven, whatever you believe in, the universe sort of gave him to me, because he's a perfect character, and for a writer he's really a doubly perfect character, because he's a writer himself. So you can see, you have a much more intimate connection with him, than with maybe any, except Babur, who also wrote. So I was immediately taken by him. I enjoyed his style. I enjoyed his humor. I enjoyed the fact that within a few pages of his book, he's talking about his alcohol addiction, his assassination of Abul Fazl. He's very sort of lucid and frank. And so yeah, and I just started reading and writing. The more I read, the more I enjoyed him, and then uh, it was just a pleasure from the beginning. Just getting to know Jahangir was great fun for me. As it didn't feel like work. I would wake up in the morning. I'd be excited to write the next few pages.
Right. So you brought in good luck, chance, and probability in your decision to write about Jahangir. The same things were at play when Jahangir was brought into the world by his father, the great Akbar. For a lot of those who have not read the book, because you describe it beautifully, the entire process of Akbar going around and what a sacrifice. He refused to uh, do shikar with favorite cheetahs every Friday, if I'm not wrong.
Hmm.
The entire thing, because also there was a lot riding on Jahangir making, surviving for the first few years of his life. But the relationship between the father and son was, even from the start, for lack of a better word, fraught. So take us through that initial, process of being born to Akbar the Great, and then
Yeah,
life
no.
from there.
Hmm. Akbar is very is desperate for a child, and this is, and he's had this was is not widely known that he did have. Jahangir was not his first son. I mean, he had at least he had these two twins, Hassan and Hussein. So at least there were these two children, and possibly more, that were born to him earlier, and they died, these two and the others, in infancy. So much so that there were even rumors going around that the old Agra fort, which he demolished, and then what stands today is what Akbar had built. Before that, there was a much humbler construction, and there was a rumor that it was haunted by ghosts that were going around, scaring the women and killing the children and all of that. So there was certainly a sense of anxiety that that he was not having children. And here's a man who, now by the time that Jahangir is born and Akbar in his late 20s, he's achieved a lot. I mean, he's been marching up and down, north and south, east and west, conquering Gujarat, conquering Bengal. He's had great success against the Rajputs, Chittorgarh, and all the various Rajput kingdoms have crumbled. So all of this he's able to achieve, it seems, by God-given miraculous ease, and yet a child, he can't have. And so then he sort of creates an army almost of people to pray for him, just as he recruits men to fight for him. So he seems to be recruiting saints and fakirs and peers to pray for his son, to sort of knock at God's door and demand his due. And he meets, finally he's told about Sheikh Salim Chishti, to whom he goes, and the Sheikh says, yes, not only one son, you will have three sons. And soon afterwards, his first Rajput queen, who's often misidentified as Jodha Bhai, her name was most likely Harka Bhai. She's the daughter of the king of Amir, and so she becomes pregnant. And just to make sure, that nothing goes awry, Akbar moves himself, bag and baggage, and with Harka Bai and the entourage, into Sheikh Salim's house, which you can imagine is a bit of a problem, because the emperor now living in your house. It's not easy for the household. Some of them complain, and this gives you a sense of some of the sheikh's sons, some of his daughters-in-law complain, because it's particularly, I suppose, troublesome for them, and to have a strange man, and possibly with many demands, in their house. And it gives you a sense of Akbar and his attitude towards complaints generally, that when he's told about this, he's saying, the sons, Sheikh's sons come to him and say, our wives are complaining. So he says, haha, he laughs, he says, wife, get other wives. So he's not at all troubled by all of this. And then Salim is born, and you can tell, even at a remove, it's described by Abul Fazl. Abul Fazl's prose tends to be rather, uh, you know, well padded. Let's say it's not, it's not clear. Unlike Jahangir writes very very clearly, but you can see the great joy across in Akbar's heart and across the kingdom. Money is distributed, gold, gems, prisoners are released, the celebration goes on for days and days. So he's delighted with this child. And then two more follow quickly, Murad and Danyal. But something starts to go wrong. There are one or two instances where Akbar speaks about Salim and sort of or is recorded to say a few flattering things about him, but not really. And then at one point, I think Salim is maybe 12ish, Murad maybe a year younger. There's a campaign against Akbar's half brother Mirza Hakim. They go off to in Kabul, and for some reason it's the younger son Murad who's given uh, charge of a section of the army to sort of nominally at least lead it against his uncle. Salim is left with the women in the base camp, although he wants to go. Now, why he's not allowed to go, whether there's nothing to it or there's some kind of shifting of affections, it's not clear. But these sort of jealousies between the brothers, the sibling rivalry gets greater and greater. And then with Akbar, there's this massive conflagration in his early 20s. I think he's about just 20, like 1920. Akbar is off to Kashmir. It's just been sort of made part of the Mughal Empire, and he goes. It's not an easy climb through the mountain passes. Thousands of stone cutters have gone before to try and even it out, but still it's very dangerous. But he wants the Akbar creatures, he wants the women to come. And Salim and Abdul Rahim Khane Khana have been put in charge of bringing the women. And then Salim arrives without them. And he says, it was too hard. I didn't think it was safe, so I left them behind. And Akbar is in a frenzy of anger. I mean, he yells at Abdul Rahim. He says, if Salim's sort of evil disposition, as he calls it, made him make this idiotic decision, there was no reason for you to do it. So, these tensions between father and son coming from where, from how, what causes them is never explicitly said by anyone. But it's also true that in his teens, Salim begins to drink, and once he begins to drink, there's no stopping him. But still, drinking is not taboo, and there's no reason just drinking alone should be something that would make Akbar so upset. Akbar is a strict father. This is the other thing, and this you get from the Jesuits. The Father Montserrat, a Jesuit priest who comes to Akbar's court and is put in charge. He's made a tutor of the nobility's sons, including Akbar's sons, and he talks about how Akbar is one very very indulgent of his daughters. He is very kind to them. He lets them get away with anything. He's very very fond of them. And very strict with his sons. And so he says not only does he shout at them and scold them and use harsh words, sometimes he would even hit them. And not only that, he has allowed the tutor's liberty to also, if the students misbehave, to beat them. And this is really rich, frankly, from Akbar, who spent most of his childhood driving his tutors to distraction. He, his father had to at one point draw lots to try and get somebody to teach him because he was so hard. He was such a difficult student. He'd forever be running off to, play with his pigeons and all of that. But with his own sons, and for these things, you can, it's not always wise to extrapolate too much of your own personal experience into history. But I think families, fathers, sons, children, mothers, they do have a certain template by which it works, and particularly very, very successful fathers, very, very strong-willed, with sons that are deeply loved, deeply desired, and also then almost tragically it is fated that they will not live up to the ambitions that the father have for the sons. It's not hard not to see that dynamic at play somewhat, and that Akbar, that on one hand he wants so much out of Salim that he cannot but be disappointed. And of course, there is. I mean, yeah, I mean, there can be so many reasons. The relationship. You look at the relationships of the Mughals generally up till this point. Babur has a very happy relationship with his father, Omar Sheikh. But then Omar Sheikh dies when Babur is about 12 years old. Humayun and Babur again seem to be getting along pretty well. I mean, the thing, little cracks are beginning to show. But again, Humayun is in his early 20s. Babur is in his mid 40s when he dies. Akbar and Humayun, very, very close relationship, very fond. Again, Humayun dies when he is, in his 40s, and Akbar is just 13 or 14 years old. Whereas with Jahangir, Akbar leads comes to a relatively long age, 63 when he dies, and Jahangir by that time is in his 30s. So they become two adult, and with their various ambitions. So that too possibly creates uh, problems. So there are.
So, could one of the reasons for this fraught relationship, and this is really reading too much into the text as it exists, and that you've also written about. So when Chishti, he makes a prophecy about Jahangir's birth, but then he also says something about Jahangir being born and him passing away. And before he passes, so there's this. You describe this very well. He places his turban on on Jahangir's head and making him, the successor to the Chishti line. You've also written about it. Could this have anything to do with Akbar's? Because Akbar, I mean, the Mughals generally didn't really have a succession strategy in place ever at any point of time. It was always this, whoever is the strongest gets there. Could Akbar be, in his own way, trying to push Jahangir away to less worldly pursuits, perhaps?
You mean that was Akbar interested in him moving into a spiritual sort of?
Yeah, Akbar had this whole Dine Ilahi phase, and I don't think Jahangir really ever got into his Dine Ilahi thing. And Jahangir was also not in any way, shape, or form a true Muslim, as it would be described by Islam in any which way. But he had his own philosophical understanding of the world. He was a good, capable scientist. Today, perhaps he would have been a leading ornithologist.
He might well have been, but he had a definite will to power. This is something that is, this is, I think, Henry Beveridge says this, that in his introduction to the sort of colonial translation of the Jahangirnama. He says that he would have been happier, as it's well known, this line, he would have been happier as the director of a natural history museum than as an emperor. But that is also, I think, part of how Jahangir, has been dismissed. His actual ambition to rule is not seen as much as his sort of pursuits of arts, aesthetics, nature, scientific experiment. All of that stands out much more. But the man, I mean, he was had a very, very strong drive, because he was at one point, this is a man who was drinking 20 cups of double distilled liquor in a day,
Yeah.
14 during the day, 7 at night. He says, I was drinking so much I couldn't even hold the goblet in my hand, and he brings it down, and he knows, the doctor says to him, if you continue like this, you're not going to last very long. So he fights that addiction, brings it down, is very, very strategic and canny in the way that he doesn't really leave his father's side to go off on various campaigns that Akbar wants him to be, in how he actually rebels against him. In how he has Abul Fazl is one of very unhappy moments in that family law, because Abul Fazl you feel a little sympathy for him, because we read so much of him, the Akbar Nama, and you get to know him almost as a person. Akbar is deeply, deeply fond of him. He's one of the people that he trusts most, maybe even more than Jahangir, which is why Jahangir is sort of so keen to get rid of him. And Jahangir has him assassinated. That he's very he's got a very sharp eye that is focused very much on the throne. And I think, to your point earlier about the idea of Mughal succession, it's true. There's no primogeniture. It's not there's no system of, okay, the eldest son is going to inherit everything, but there is a system until Akbar comes along of the empire being divided between the various sons. I mean, so Timur does this, Genghis Khan does this, Babur in a way does this, which is why all these problems happen. He leaves Hindustan, what little they have of it at the time, to Humayun, and Kabul to Kamran, right? And when Humayun loses Hindustan, then he wants to take Kabul, and that's why there's so much, there's years and years of fight between the two brothers. But this idea of dividing the sort of patrimony amongst various sons exists, and Akbar in a way undoes that. Because Akbar, one of the things that he does is, brings about the. It's not even, sorry, just to go back a little. It's not just dividing the empire amongst the sons. It's also, in a sense, that the larger ruling family consists of warlords who are more or less equal. So the emperor is the kind of first amongst equals, right? So the feudal chiefs who go off have more or less virtually independent fiefdoms, and they send some tribute once in a while to the emperor. Now, Akbar undoes all that, because I mean, a lot has been written about the centralization. He centralizes power within himself, and this whole the Mansabdari system that he creates, and it's actually, I mean, it's less on the face of it exciting than all of the battles, but in some ways it's more, because he really has to struggle a lot to get this in the teeth of opposition. Because what he does is he turns sort of free warlords into salaried bureaucrats, jagirdars, who are posted from here to here, who are not actually the rulers of that particular land. They will move away after a few years. And one of the things that he does in the process of making this Mansabdari system is that he inducts his sons also. The three sons also are given Mansabdari ranks. So he's overturning all these systems, including that of this of inheritance, of dividing the kingdom. He might have done it, divided it between the three, but he doesn't. And as a result, it looks like nobody's quite sure what's going on, who's going to inherit what. Are they going to have to fight for it? Because this is all new. I mean, he's sort of making it up, and then he brings the grandson into the mix. He becomes very fond of Salim's eldest son, Khusro. So there's a lot of complication and confusion going on that is partly, I think, creation of Akbar's own fiddlings with systems that existed. He's trying out something new.
Right. So now we've covered bits and pieces of Jahangir's childhood. Uh, the throne. So when Akbar is, so he was not really the favorite son, but the favorite son decided to get into a battle with uh, the father. And Jahangir has these moments where he does thinks about something and then he rethinks it. And you kind of pointed out in the book that there was a time that he wanted to charge at Akbar, but then thought better of it and then decided to get back into the royal fold. So tell us about this one process, because as you pointed out earlier, unlike the other Mughal rulers before him, Babur comes to India in 1526, passes away 4 years later. Humayun also, first he's running away from Sher Shah Suri, he has other argument, but he also passes away earlier. Jahangir, when he ascends the throne, is moving into middle 30s, right? So he had a very tense relationship with his father. There's a lot of adulation, but the father perhaps did not really think of him as reigning material. He had written, spoken about Jahangir's eldest son being his true heir. But tell us a little bit about this, because then the Mughal bureaucracy created by Akbar steps in to take a call on who should be the great man's heir. So tell us a little bit about what was happening in the court at this point of time.
I mean, it's just it's a sort of dizzying mess of intrigue and politicking, and everybody, it's making their own alliances left and right. And Jahangir goes off in the early 1600s. He goes off to Allahabad and he sets up his own court. He's clearly sort of seems to have had enough. He makes some sort of half-hearted attempt to even loot Akbar's treasury in Agra, but then his grandmother comes out and he's so embarrassed that he runs off. And he sets up his own throne. He talks even about this sort of very, you can still see it. He has this black marble throne made for himself. It's there in the Agra fort now. And he's very pleased with it. And he titles himself Shah and Jahangir. He gives himself this grand name. And he begins to rule. And Akbar, meanwhile, has gone off to the Deccan to have sort of one last sort of campaign. Murad, around this time, is already dead. Daniel seems to be dying. Akbar is desperate for Daniel, the youngest, not to die. He sends emissaries, nurses, letters. He scolds him, he cajoles him. He's in Agra by now, but in the end, Daniel. I mean, he stops his liquor supply, which is what kills him, because one of his attendants brings him wine or liquor in barrel of a gun. So Daniel dies of rust poisoning, not alcohol poisoning. So now one more son is gone. There's only Jahangir left, and Jahangir's elder son Khusro, to whom Akbar has become very attached, and from a very early age. When Khusro is only about 6 years old, he gives him a very very high mansab, a rank, and which is in some ways seems like it is hinting at something, at his favor. Not about Khusro, about somebody, another of his grandsons, Abul Fazl, in fact, says quite explicitly, he says the emperor loves his grandsons more than he loves his sons. And this, in any other family, can be taken as just what happens. Grandchildren and grandparents tend to get along better than parents and children. But in this case, where there's this whole empire at stake, it requires slightly different meaning. But meanwhile, there's another force. So there, there's this sort of dysfunctional father-son relationships that are happening, and the battle for power. Meanwhile, there are the women of the family, and the Mughal women are historically played a very important role in keeping the family together. So even when Humayun and Kamran are at dagger, they're fighting battle after battle. People are are dying in droves. But their grand aunt Khanzada Begum, who's Babar's sister, she acts as a kind of ambassador between them, trying to sort of keep them together. So now, similarly, at this point, Jahangir's Jahangir's grandmother, that is Hamida Banu Begum, that is Akbar's mother, whom he loves and respects greatly, plus a couple of his aunts, plus his own mother. They're all ancestors. All of them are sort of lobbying on his behalf with Akbar. So more than once, he is at one point. He, like you said, he decides to march upon Akbar. He's got an army of 3,000 men. Nobody's quite sure what he's planning. Akbar sends him a very stern message. He's in Etawah, and he says, either you come alone or you be prepared for the consequences. And clearly, Jahangir is not inclined to face these consequences, so he turns and goes back. At another point, his grandmother and his aunts go to him, bring him back, arrange a sort of, very public reconciliation between father and son. It doesn't last very long, lasts about 6 months. Akbar tries once again to send Jahangir off on a mission. Jahangir is very disinclined. And so Akbar sort of says, okay, fine, why don't you just go back to Allahabad and enjoy yourself there? So he goes off. And things are getting worse and worse and worse. And eventually, I think it's about 16:2 or 3, and Akbar has really had enough, and he's going to march again. He's going to march against Jahangir now. And once again, it's Jahangir's grandmother who saves him. She's quite old now, and the word arrives just as Akbar is about to set sail that Hamida is critically unwell. She's on her deathbed. And at first, Akbar thinks that she's making it up to save her grandson. He's not sure if this is a strategic ploy. But then when he realizes that it's true, he rushes back, and he's very, very close to his mother. So of course he's very distraught. And Jahangir at this point sees that what he has to do, and he realizes that this is a point for him. This is a moment that he can perhaps reconcile with his father. And the people who are with him are not, his advisors are saying, don't go, Akbar will put you in prison or something, anything could happen. But Jahangir goes. And again, there's a very public reconcilement. There's a private sort of scene between father and son in which Akbar yells at Jahangir, possibly hits him, puts him on a kind of on the wagon, like puts him in, shuts him in a room where he can't get any alcohol. This doesn't last very long, but still some sort of, and now there's nobody left. There's just Jahangir and Akbar, and of course still Khusro until the very last. And there's this well-known story of whether Akbar arranged it, what he thought, what he was planning, we don't know, but there's an elephant fight. And the elephant fight is between Jahangir's elephant and Khusro's elephant. And the two of them, fights used to happen on the banks of the Yamuna. So these two beasts are charging at each other. And as the elephants are fighting, the supporters of the two princes also begin to get into a fight. Again, it's not clear whether Akbar intended this or not, but he's old, he's weak, and he's very unhappy with what he sees, and he falls ill. And during the time that he's, the weeks that he's being treated, it's a bad stomach condition that eventually kills him. That he's being treated, this sort of politicking is going on, and Jahangir, again, to point to his political side and his strategic side, has managed to get a great amount of support from, particularly at this particular moment in time, even though, like you said, he is not a particularly religious man, but his support comes from the conservative Muslim orthodoxy in Akbar's court, which has really suffered under Akbar's, experiments with religion. So he's got that. Khusro, meanwhile, has also got some very, very strong backers. One is his uncle, Man Singh, and the other is his father-in-law, Aziz. Aziz is Akbar's milk brother and one of his closest, oldest friends. So both of these very, very powerful men, Jahangir refers to them as old wolves, are backing Khusro. And at the moment of, when Akbar's on his deathbed, in just in 2 days or around that time, there is even a actual meeting that they call, and they suggest that let us bypass Jahangir and put Khusro on the throne. Jahangir, meanwhile, is camped outside the fort. He's actually scared to come in because he knows there's a danger to his life. So he's camped outside on the river in a boat, and he's doing his own politicking, and so and then he basically emerges victorious. He is able to get more powerful nobility to his side, particularly a clan called the Sayyids of Bara, who refused to have anything to do with jumping over the father and having the son succeed. And eventually, it is Jahangir who is called to Akbar's deathbed. And then I think we did a very moving scene. Akbar, gives him his turban, his sword, and even gives him a hug, at least according to one source. I like to believe that he did it. That there was the end between father. But yeah, but and very unclear succession, and actually within 6 months, Khosrow has rebelled against Jahan. So he doesn't have an easy start uh, at all. It's very messy and murky.
So now we're coming to the most interesting part of this history, because so Akbar blesses him. He becomes the, but it's not your the Jahangir that we've seen till now who comes to the throne. It's not the 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 aesthete, the scientifically minded, the sheep experimenter of Delhi. He's not the one who's coming to the throne. The person who comes to the throne is a very cruel warlord, essentially. You have some very interesting sort of anecdotes about it, but Jahangir inherits a lot of the courtiers of Akbar. One of them, Abdul Rahim Khan Khana, who was also his tutor for some time, he sides with Khusro, and there is a war because I think he ends up calling him Abdul Rahim Khar. Is it that same Abdul Rahim, or was it a
No, no,
different?
no, no, no. That's a different one. That's Abdul Rahman. Yeah, that's no. It's I know it's yeah. Abdul Rahim. No, he Abdul Rahim is distanced because of Jahangir as a policy. Tries to keep the old guard a little away, and that any change of guard, people bring their own people in, and
Right.
keep the people away. So Abdul Rahim basically spends most of his time thereafter in the Deccan, and
Right.
and he's
But his
sort of.
sons are executed. Both his sons are
Well,
executed.
yeah, that is later on because that's when Abdul Rahim, who's very canny operator, otherwise makes a big strategic mistake or is forced into it because Shah Jahan rebels against
Right.
I'm
Jahangir.
sorry, against Jahangir, and as a result, this poor Abdul Rahim gets caught in the middle, and his sons get caught in the middle, and yes, and they are executed.
Right.
So
So, sorry, my mistake. I confused Abdul Rahim and Abdul Rahman. So, this is the bit that I was referring to. So, Abdul Rahman is also an old courtier, if I'm not wrong. And he's also a general. But then he gets called donkey by Jahangir, Kar, for throughout his life, although he regains a lot of his. So, in this entire process that was happening, you have different shades of Jahangir. On the one hand, his fight with Khusro, whom he refers to as, I mean, there's a lot of love for Khusro, but then also Khusro is actively planning to get back on Jahangir, and essentially he makes an attempt even when Jahangir takes him all the way to Afghanistan. What does this entire period in the Mughal history tell us about the innate nature of Mughal Empire? Because if you actually look at it from outside, it's one of the richest empires in the world. By this time, the English have come in, uh, different Jesuits are there. And yet, at the same time, these people can't quite make up their mind about what is it that they want. It's a constant expansion, deflation. What does Jahangir, during this prime of his rule, tell us about the Mughal Empire as it is or as it was?
Well, so these particular incidents that you're referring to, they occur because this Khusro rebels, right? Khusro rebels and goes off to try and capture Lahore, in which he is helped by these two warlords. One is Abdur Rahman, and one is, I think, something Hassan. Not, I'm forgetting the other chap's name, but the two guys. And then they fail. To cut a long story short, and Jahangir is of course furious, and he has. He's not. He is what he is going to make an example of this, right? He is not going to brook any kind of threat to his throne, which he has acquired with such difficulty only 6 months ago. So there's a. He doesn't want. He's not going to let, he's not going to let them get away with it. So as a result, he organizes a really sort of gruesome spectacle of punishment, in which these rebels, all on the road leading up to Lahore, from the road to the main gate, they are impaled on all sides, both sides of the road. And these two, this Abdur Rahman and the other chap, are wrapped in hides. One in the hide of a donkey, the other in the hide of an ox. And this is why at the first the other chap dies of suffocation. Abdul Rahman manages to survive and remains in the court. It's because he was wrapped up in a donkey that is referred to as a donkey by Jahangir for the rest of his life. And then Khusro is perched on the most sort of measly, sickly elephant that they can find, and made to ride through this to see, what it is that he has managed to achieve. And of course, it says a great deal for Khusro's ambition and his charisma that within a, a year, maybe a few months, because from Lahore they go to Kabul, and he's again managed to get supporters, even though they've seen what happened to the last lot, and he's again fomenting a rebellion against his father. So on the one hand, of course, perhaps maybe simplistically speaking, but the obvious sort of thing about the Mughal Empire that seems to strike you at this moment is that it has become so very, very, very rich and so very powerful that the attraction of that throne will overwhelm any other consideration. There's just too much power at stake for anyone to for any life or any relationship to be held as superior to that. On the other hand, if you look at it, like now we're looking at just this particular moment, and this it's a very sort of unstable beginning because of Khusro's two rebellions. So it takes a while for things to settle. But on the other hand, if you go back and look at, move away from this particular moment, then also one of the things that you realize is that the death of a king or the change of succession would often herald a period of chaos before and after. Because suddenly the kingdom, whether it was the Mughal or any of the other dynasties that came before or after, the period of succession could be a little bit uncertain, and things are much outside what this instability could start riots, could start, people would be scared, and we know this because there's this beautiful sort of autobiography in verse by a young Jain merchant called Banarsi Das, which is called Ardh Kathanak. It's been translated and beautifully translated too. And he talks about what happened when Akbar died. He happened to be in Jaunpur. And he says when he heard the news, he himself fainted. He fainted on the stairs. He hurt the back of his head. He says the whole town was in a panic, thinking that robbers will descend, there will be looting, there will be rioting, there will be complete breakdown of what we call law and order. People were hiding their jewels. Rich people were dressing themselves in rags to try and pretend that they didn't have any money. Everyone was anticipating some kind of chaos. And yet, he says, Nothing happened. A herald arrived saying that Jahangir will be the next king. There was no instability whatsoever. So one of the things that has happened, partly as a result of Akbar's intense focus on building the empire, building the scaffolding of the empire, and it is so strong that it is able to withstand the shock of even something as big as Akbar, who has really ruled for a century now. He's become legendary in his own time, and yet the empire remains stable. So there's certain stability that it has acquired, but also, of course, this great this great lure, and it is evolving its own system. So there's this fantastic book by Muniz Farooqi. You may have read it. It's called Princes of the Mughal Empire, which talks about this, how succession started working during this time, and how all, particularly so with Jahangir and with Jahangir's successors, with Khurram, later Shah Jahan, and then even with his successors, Aurangzeb, Darakshah, all of them, the princes would be almost expected to develop their own mini courts. So their own nobility, their own military, their own, uh, including arts and culture and all of that, which because they knew everyone knew that there was going to be a battle to succeed. So and whoever had the greatest strength, both military, political, cultural, whatever, all of these things combined, greater claim, greater legitimacy would be the one who would succeed to the throne, because that earlier system of the whole thing divided was no longer didn't exist, and primogeniture didn't exist. So this was, princes would have to almost, it happened almost organically that they had to start developing their own power centers, which had its good and bad sides. So the pros and cons. I think one of the good parts is that it encourages talent. There's a sort of there's more and more place for different kinds of talent to grow. And one of the obvious negatives is that you have very ambitious, very powerful, very rich men always on the verge of, of battle.
Rebellion.
Yes.
So that brings us to the other character who Jahangir had to contend with, the person who saved him from the second rebellion of Khurram, later Shah
Mm.
Jahan. Uh, he gets to know about the hunting trip massacre that Khusro had anticipated, and at that point of time, you beautifully write about that Jahangir being the, well, for lack of a better word, vengeful emperor at that point of time, wanted to kill off 400, 500 people to send a message. What he had done just 6 months, not even 6 months, 3, 4 months back. But he then thinks about it and thinks strategically and kind of gives up on it. And suddenly we see the star that would later become Shah Jahan rise up. Uh, but it was also not a very happy relationship. It was a very fractious relationship, which kind of overshadows Jahangir's reign in a way, and then overshadows Jahangir as an emperor. So, speaking from a literary perspective, do you think Jahangir ends up being that one person who has a lot of promise but never quite lives up to the promise? Sort of a flawed hero. So,
He's a flawed character, of course. I mean, I think most of us are flawed, and then when you're in the sort of spotlight of history, your flaws show up even more. So he had
flawed, flawed
very,
character with the wrong characterization. You're absolutely correct. All of us are. But
yeah.
let's call him a tragic character.
I don't know. I don't know. That's a very nice, interesting question, and it's making me. Now I'm really thinking whether Jahangir would be a tragic character in that sense? If you ask me, I would, as a immediate this thing, I would say no, because he has a difficult relationship with the elder son Khusro in the beginning, and after that second rebellion, he blinds him and he's kept a prisoner with him for most of his life. Uh, but then, after this shaky beginning, Jahangir actually has a fairly stable reign for 20 odd years. It's this, he doesn't, he manages even to expand the empire a little bit. Shah Jahan, Khurram, the later Shah Jahan, goes off, has campaigns in Mewar, in the Deccan. He loses a little bit also, he loses Kandahar, which I don't think they ever gain back, the Mughals. And But broadly, the empire is prosperous and it is stable, and he is not he's not a cruel or despotic or unpopular ruler. He doesn't have the mythical sort of aura that Akbar had, but he's not a bad emperor. He's pretty conscientious about holding court. One of the British Englishmen who traveled there, maybe Thomas Rowe, but it could be somebody else, says that you can set your clock by the emperor's routine. Because he gets up in the morning, does the darshan where he shows his face, holds the public audience, holds the private audience. It's not that he's just living for pleasure alone. His relationship with his wife certainly is one of the most sort of enjoyable aspects of his character, and he seems to have a very nice, happy relationship with Nurjan, and also with Khurram for much of this time. He's increasingly fond of Khurram. Khurram knows, exactly what to do to please his father, and does it. But it is only again at the end. So there are these, you can see that his reign is bookended by these two periods of instability and rebellion. So the Khusro at the beginning, and then Khurram at the end, and that partly because Nur Jahan's ambitions are clearly going to, outlast Jahangir's life, and Khurram can see that. So it's really the battle is between Khurram that is happening, and it's happening via Jahangir, because he is the emperor and he has to. It's his throne that the two of them are battling for. So in that sense, yes, and towards the end, he's deeply disappointed by his son, whom he had elevated to such heights. He had given him, and possibly, sort of recalling his own having to go to Allahabad and make himself Shah. Jahangir had actually given the title of Shah to Khurram. He calls him Shah Khurram. Then he calls him Shah. He gives him the name Shah Jahan himself. He's trying to keep Khurram as happy as he can, and vice versa. Khurram fights these battles for him, brings him back this bounty from the Deccan, with fabulous gems, jewels, riches of all kinds. But then, yes, in the end, it falls apart, and from calling him my favorite son, my beloved Khurram, he starts calling him Badolat, the wretch. He writes, and because he's writing himself, and you can really even, I mean, of course, no diary, and it was not a private diary; it was meant for public consumption. Clearly, he wasn't revealing, sort of wearing his heart on his sleeve, but still, you get a sense of a person through their writing, and in those last years, you get a sense of this aging, weakening, sickly, unhappy man who did not expect to be betrayed in the way that he feels he has been betrayed by his son. But all in all, if you think of tragedy as a kind of a sort of of being pulled down or being punished for your own, let's say, hubris, in the sort of classical sense of your own hubris, or suffering sort of a deep suffering that is generated from within, uh, or that you're unable to do anything about. In that sense, no. I mean, Jahangir to me sounds he led a fairly good life, and he got achieved many of the things that he wanted to achieve. He had difficult relationships, but not always um, unrewarding. I mean, some of the relationships were close, were rewarding. He had close friendships. Um, so he enjoyed, he enjoyed his friendships. He enjoyed the world. He was a curious man who had every opportunity to indulge his curiosity, and he was a man who was not only indulging himself. He was a man who did it seems. Uh,
So the reason
have-
I brought up tragedy is because
Hmm.
because your book is episodic, and I think that's one of the best things about it. Yeah,
Hmm.
actually, so let me take you to Guru Arjan Dev.
Hmm.
So Guru Arjan Dev, he sides with the grandson of the emperor who's just passed away. And he sides with him, and 'cause somebody comes up to him, Khusro, and he kind of anoints him, and that is enough to trigger Jahangir. He kind of takes away the land. He has him put in prison, and anybody who sides with Khusro at that point of time becomes his bete noir. And yes, you are correct that he expands the empire somewhat, but that is it. He expands the empire somewhat. If you were to take a look at it, um, after Humayun, I think Humayun and Jahangir kind of come very close in the amount of land they added to the empire. Shah Jahan, there are records of Shah Jahan not really treating him as a general, not really heeding his advice. He kowtowed to him because, not kowtowing to him. In fact, there are records where Shah Jahan has aired his views about Jahangir being vain. Coming from Shah Jahan, that's very rich, but that's what it is. In that sense, the ability to run an empire, um, and he lives in his father's shadow, the conversation that we were having, because a 50-year reign that kind of puts in the administrative processes, the taxation system, all of that, Jahangir just continues that at best. He does not destroy it, which Aurangzeb ends up doing, but he doesn't really add anything to it. So, for a man who's this focused on getting power, he's not really any good at managing the said power. That is my observation. But I would want you, because you've done this more deeply than I have.
No, no, I would agree with you that he doesn't add anything particularly significant to it. Even the campaigns. I mean, he's never a big campaigner throughout his life. I don't think he ever actually leads any army into battle.
He
Unlike
never does, and that's Shah Jahan's point throughout,
yeah,
that I
yeah.
am the general.
Exactly. But although even Shah Jahan, to be honest, I mean, he does lead these armies, but how much of a general he is, particularly when it comes to the Deccan, because in the Deccan, he goes in and it more or less seems like the Deccani Sultanates give him a lot of money to leave, and he does, and then
That's what
there's
he does.
so it's not in any sense, it's not the kind of conquest that Akbar did. So Akbar, goes, he takes a place, he builds alliances, whether it's through marriage or through other means. He makes sure that those regions become part of the empire, not necessarily. I mean, like this, you cannot make an omelette without breaking eggs. So some of the things that he does are not particularly pleasant at all. Like his betrayal of uh, of the king of Kashmir,
Right.
which Bhagwan Das, his brother-in-law, has made a promise of safe passage to and the Yusuf Chak, and said that you will be given back your kingdom. But Akbar just sends him off to prison in Bihar and sends his own governors there. And Bhagwan Das is very upset by this. And he sort of fight with Akbar about it. But anyway, so that's just an aside. But yes, so Jahangir does not do that kind of thing. He does not bring any innovation to the administration. No, he doesn't, necessarily expand the land. No, but he does sort of keep. He doesn't destroy that. Which could have happened with a man who was sort of more sort of self-indulgent, or he maintains the legitimacy of the Mughal Empire remains intact. The legitimacy of the Mughal king as ruler of the empire remains, intact.
Right.
And
That I absolutely agree with. I mean, compared to Aurangzeb, he comes across as a statesman, but we have hit the 1 hour mark,
yes,
and there is a lot to pick up. And I just wanted to pick up episodes from the book.
sure.
Something sweet to end on from the Mughal point of view. Jahangir was the last of Mughals who could speak Turki, if I'm not wrong, because Khurram and Khusro, they refused to pick up Turki. And that's a very interesting way, because Baburnama, uh, if one were to call it In Search of Melons, would be a fitting sort of book. But Jahangir is the beginning of that line, which from where the Central Asian roots start getting cut off. 5 years have or 6 years have passed since the publication of the book, almost half a decade. Has your assessment of Jahangir changed? Have you now thought about you after that you've written about Akbar? So now that you contrast the two characters together, you end the book on a very somber note on Jahangir, and you begin the book in a very interesting sort of peek to this part of the Mughal history. But having written about Akbar and Jahangir, has your assessment of Jahangir changed from where you stopped it?
My God, writing about Akbar was so very different. And of course, I read about Akbar while I was writing about Jahangir, but not in the kind of depth that I had to when I was writing about him. And in the light of his achievement, his energy, his ambition, his ruthlessness, his the contradictions of his character that make him so very, very hard to hold on to. He's just very slippery. Like there's nothing that's very, very hard to hold on to say, okay, this is what Akbar was, because he wasn't. He was this and this and this and this. He was so many different things, and not all of them necessarily always pleasant, but always, at the end, like when you read about him, you cannot but fail to see that, this was a man who was exceptional. He did do something that was exceptional. It's not just hype, it's not just Abul Fazl who hyped him up with the Akbarnama that made us all believe that it's a great guy. He did achieve more than a normal human being might have been able to do. There was something truly exceptional about him. And Jahangir, as we discussed, is not an exceptional human being. He is fairly ordinary. He has great talents. He's a wonderful writer. He has a sense for beauty that when you read his words, you can really see when he writes about art and he describes art, you can see his intense both interest and intelligence. He's a deeply, deeply intelligent man. When you read other people writing about him, even particular people, like someone like Thomas Rowe, you see that you see the curiosity and intelligence that animates him. He's a very, very affable, intelligent, curious, uh, an intriguing person, but of course, in the light of Akbar, he's just an ordinary person. So I would say, but did my assessment change of him? Only in the sense that maybe I thought a very sympathetic character from the word go, from the minute I encountered him. I don't know why, there's something about him that I really enjoyed. When I read about him from Akbar's point of view, where when you're writing about a subject, you tend naturally to sort of take on their positions and become sort of more empathetic to them. So I could see, uh, you know, how deeply Akbar was troubled by Jahangir, and how perplexed and anxious he was, and in his old age, by the all his sons, uh, and particularly perhaps Jahangir, that he was not able in the end to uh, control that part, his own family, this whole empire he was able to bring under his wing. He used to have these parades on Mondays, camels on Tuesdays, elephants on Wednesdays, this, on Thursdays, that. All his empire you can see being paraded in front of him, and his sons, when he asked them to come to his court, they would refuse. So he was. You see that sort of loss of power that came with age and with having this kind of troubled relationship. So I felt a little worse for Akbar this time around when I was writing about Akbar, and a little. But overall, I think if I was to just try and think of what it is about Jahangir um, that stays with me, or how it changed, I think in some ways it is that precisely because Jahangir does not evoke the kind of strong reactions that someone like Akbar does, or someone like Aurangzeb does. With Akbar particularly, because you're always sort of slightly either in awe. When if you read people who write about Akbar, people who write about Akbar either write in terms of, my God, this man was a superman, or they really, really dislike him. Like, say, between Abul Fazl and Badawi, these two sort of different ways of looking at him persist through the historiography. Whereas with Jahangir, because he does not evoke such strong reactions, he allows you a kind of, you might say, maybe a kind of interlude in the Mughal Empire, at a time where you can sit back and look at it. He travels through it. He leaves you these wonderful descriptions of all the places that he visits, not just Kashmir most famously, but all kinds of Gujarat, Mandu, so all Rajasthan he goes to. He's a very, because he's a good writer. He leaves you a sense of the vegetation, the animal life, the kind of poetry that is written, the kind of anything that catches the different ways of fishing in different parts of the country. So he leaves you with a sort of moment of rest, let's say, and he allows you to look at certain of the more contentious ideas about the Mughals uh, without without more dispassionately. Because since you're not, nobody has an opinion about Jahangir, nobody is expected to have an opinion about Jahangir. You can see the things that he does without feeling obliged to have a strong sort of sort of views about it one way or the other. Let's say like his views on religion. Let's say, because you can really see in him he is kind of the pot in which the melting is happening. He's Akbar's son. His mother is Hindu Rajput. His father is Central Asian Sunni Muslim, and he is described by Thomas Rowe as somebody, because of course there's still this idea of maybe converting the Mughal emperor. And Thomas Rowe writes to the Archbishop of Canterbury at the time, saying this man is either the easiest person to convert or the hardest, because he says he will listen to anything, but he believes nothing. So he is, in a sense, uh, an atheist almost in the modern sense, or or somebody who's curious about gods, about the supernatural, about divinity, but also is quite happy to be a disbeliever, to not believe in anything, and to so you can see all these sort of various contradictions that are playing out in his character. He is at some level very easily, you know. You can even say whether the sort of what's the word for the stereotype of the imperial despot, this man who's just sort of sitting around enjoying himself. And at the same time, he is a man who's very, very particular about managing his time, about managing his empire, making sure that the idea of justice, for example, the famous golden chain that he hangs in
Yeah.
character. The idea of care for the kingdom. Also, you see as being tenet uh, of Mughal kings and of any king that would want to hold on to power. You have to have a legitimacy vis-a-vis the people, and you can see Jahangir creating that by his constant audiences and the administration. He's administrating the things that his father has left.
Right.
So
That is true. But one very interesting thing, we
yes.
have in Delhi roads named after just about every Mughal emperor. The one road that I could not find, and correct me if I'm wrong, I could not find a road named after Jahangir. There's the
No,
Akbar road. There was an
no.
Aurangzeb road.
I'm happy. I'm happy to tell you that there is one. I was also so when I was writing about Jahangir, same thought struck me because I couldn't
Yeah.
think like where is Jahangir Road, but it's there. It's near Minto Road. You know where the Ajmeri Gate
Okay.
railway station. It just if you look in that area, it's one of those roads is named
Jahangir road.
after
Oh,
yes,
but it kind of tells you something about it, that
hidden away. Yeah, yeah.
it's no Akbar Road. It's no
No, not,
the erstwhile Aurangzeb Road.
no, not at
It's
all.
somewhere on the edge of memory. The other
Yes.
thing that really struck me is that a lot of the later Mughal emperors, while they were Mughal emperors in name only, they take Akbar. You have Akbar the second, and so on and so forth. Um, they don't take two names largely. I mean, of course, Babur doesn't come back uh, as a name. Humayun also has, like, there are people named Humayun in the emperor spread. Jahangir and Aurangzeb, two names that don't really get taken up that much. I don't know what it says, but it says something. But of course, it's just a statement based on very cursory research.
Mm,
Um,
mm.
but yeah, I think he would have been happy as a perhaps not director of Natural History Museum, but sort of a medieval David Attenborough. I think that was his.
Maybe. Maybe, although, but because he was used to power and he knew how to exert it. So
Right.
yeah, maybe he would be he would have to have a large production team under him to to boss around.
Right,
But yes,
absolutely. It's been there is a question if you want to take it up. Uh,
sure.
I can okay. So there's a question for you. That you've written. So recently read two of your books, The Dead Camel and Jahangir. Found them both incredibly compelling. Okay. Have you ever considered writing a piece about Noor Jahan and Salim? Their story seems like a fascinating theme.
It is a fascinating theme, but the problem is, and there is, I think, perhaps Ruby Lal's book on Noor Jahan you may have read. It's the problem with writing. If the Jahangir himself, there's very little information about. When you compare with somebody like Akbar, where there's reams and reams of writing from his own time, later time also. Jahangir, there's very little. Fortunately, it's very rich because it's written by himself. So Jahangir Nama is a fantastic entry into his life and his mind, even his aesthetics. But when it comes to women, there's nothing. There's very little that you can piece together of the lives uh, uh, of the women in the Mughal court. I mean, even of course, there's Gulbadan has written a diary, which is very very nice. Noor Jahan is one of the most celebrated, one of the most powerful women in the world. She was practically a as Rubila says, practically a ruler with Jahangir, a co-sovereign. She has coins minted in her name. And yet, the historiography that follows immediately after, which may even actually explain why Jahangir even today is tucked away in your metro road and not in the broad arteries, is led by Shah Jahan, who has a great interest in justifying his own rebellion against his father. He cannot, of course, say that my father deserved to be rebelled against, because you cannot, as an emperor, encourage rebellions against. Now he's the emperor, so you don't want to encourage that kind of thinking. But he can try and imply that my father was sort of under the thumb of his overly ambitious wife. So it's not that he was a bad king, but he was weak, or he was taken over, he was controlled by Noor Jahan. So as a result, it's Noor Jahan who bears the brunt of the discrediting. But also Jahangir in the process is, by implication, also discredited and sidelined. So partly perhaps because of that, also there is very little about Noor Jahan. Even those gold coins that were minted, that she had minted, uh, Shah Jahan was so unhappy and angry with that she had them all melted and destroyed.
Yeah.
So it's very hard then to write, about Jahangir and Noor Jahan, because I wouldn't have access to enough detail.
Right.
But somebody should. I mean, in fiction, it would maybe make a great book. And thank you for the comment. It's very, very kind and flattering of you to mention
Right.
that.
But thanks so much for doing this. It was a very interesting thing, and I just wanted to take up bits and pieces from the book. But for people who are going to watch it later, the book is, I think, available everywhere you can get a book. And this is a copy of the book. But also, my recommendation would be Akbar. Uh, get both the books, read them together. In fact, Akbar and Jahangir. I think then it'll make way more sense. But thank you so much for doing it. It was
Thank
a
you so
pleasure.
much. It was a great pleasure for me. Thank you very much.
Hope to see you soon, and again with a on the SenseMaker with a new book. Uh,
I hope so. Fingers crossed.
all right. Thank you.
I
Please.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. And good luck with your work.
Please do.
Let me
Yes,
let me
absolutely.
know how that proceeds. I
Sure.
will